What fun. Great. Then maybe let's get started. Good morning, all. We know that some people will join us and they will just trickle in, but we will try to respect your time as much as possible. Kerry, you are our star speaker. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Kelly will introduce you. And Kelly, for those who do not know Kelly, she is a wonderful research associate working here at the Center for Social Concerns since July on a project on CST and financial decision making. And it's within this context that Kelly and Kerry started talking. And now, Kelly, may I hand over to you. Thank you so much. The research seminar will end on time at 10 o'clock. And then we will move into a weekend and watch the Boston game. Kelly.
Thank you so much, Clemens. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us for what we hope will be a very fruitful conversation with Kerry Robinson. I first met Kerry as an undergraduate back in 2016 at Yale University's St. Thomas More Catholic Chapel and Center. We were piloting the Leadership Roundtable's ESTEAM program, which stands for Engaging Students to Enliven the Ecclesial Mission. It's a program that works to develop the capacity of college students to assume leadership positions in their parishes after graduation. Kerry was one of our cohort's first guest speakers, and while I didn't know it at the time, Kerry's work and dedication to Yale's Catholic life years before enabled my college faith journey to unfold as meaningfully as it did. Kerry is a trustee of the Rascal Foundation for Catholic Activities, a member of Fatica, and was the founding executive director of the Leadership Roundtable, an organization that is dedicated to bringing about the best practices in the management, human resource development, and finances of the Catholic Church by promoting the expertise and involvement of lay leaders. She has served on the National Committee for the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops' Catholic Campaign for Human Development, and has served as a trustee on the national boards of the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, the Institute for Religious Education and Pastoral Ministry at Boston College, and the Center for the Study of Church Management at Villanova, among others. She has served on the advisory boards of the Voices of Faith, the Initiative of Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University, and Catholic Women Preach. She has also served as the Director of Development for St. Thomas More Catholic Chapel and Center at Yale, where she successfully led a $75 million campaign effort to build the Catholic Student Center and to expand the chapel's intellectual and spiritual ministry.
Okay.
Perhaps most importantly, Kerry is an enthusiast. She's a believer, a visionary, and a remarkably bold and bright light in the church and the world today. Her work and approach are testament to the good news of the gospel and all the church is and has the potential to be. In her prize-winning book, Imagining Abundance, Kerry writes about the spiritual call of stewardship and frames fundraising as ministry. Reflecting on an encounter with Henry Nouwen, Kerry writes, "You love what God has created by being fruitful with your own life. Being fruitful means recognizing all that you have been given to us is an expression of God's love for us. Everything comes from God. We begin with gratitude for such blessings, and we desire to love God back. We love God by being fruitful with our lives, which is to take all that has been given to us and to place it at the service of others, of creation, of life itself. It is to be a beneficial presence. It is to contribute and to bless rather than to take or condemn. It is to demonstrate our love for God by loving all that God loves and attending to whom and what God loves by giving our whole selves in service. It was the clearest illustration of stewardship that I have ever been given." Kerry, it's such a joy and a privilege to have you with us this morning. We welcome you virtually to the Center and to Notre Dame. For everybody else, over the next 50 minutes, Kerry will speak for about half an hour, and then we will reserve the rest of the time for questions and answers. And to be very mindful of your time, as Clemens mentioned, we will promptly end at 10 o'clock to begin the weekend. And with that, Kerry, I will turn the floor over to you.
Kelly, thank you. Everybody should be so blessed in their life to have Kelly introduce them at least once. It's so kind. And I am grateful to Clemens and Kelly for reaching out to me during this pandemic, exposing me to the work that they are doing, that you all are engaged in. I am enamored by that, and I stand in great admiration of your scholarship and your commitment to strengthening the church and faith-based organizations. I'm much more of a practitioner than an academic, so I'm especially humbled to be in your presence today. I wanted to just begin with talking about 4 Catholic institutions that have shaped my own service to the church and informed my own commitments and service, the context for some of the thoughts that I wanted to share with you and will frame our discussion. The first is the Rascal Foundation for Catholic Activities. This is a private family foundation that is celebrating its 75th anniversary this month. What this means is 75 years ago, my great-grandparents, John and Helena Rascal, pooled their resources, created a family foundation, and expressed two intentions. The first was that all of their resources would be used exclusively to support the Catholic Church anywhere in the world, any form of ministry, nothing was excluded. And the second was that they wanted their children and descendants to be stewards of the foundation's resources. To this day, there are 5 generations later, there are close to 100 direct descendants, so spouses are excluded, but these are all cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents engaged in the work of the Rascal in a voluntary, non-remunerative way. When you are invited at the age of 18 to become a member of the Rascal Foundation and you say yes, you understand you will not be paid for your time, you will be reimbursed for travel, but the expectation is you will fully immerse yourself in the life of the church at the local, diocesan, national, and global level, the better to anticipate funding opportunities and unmet needs of the church. So my cousins and I grew up really from a very young age, exposed to the best of what the Catholic Church has to offer, usually through the example of women and men, ordained, religious, and lay, who were standing at the vanguard of human suffering, bearing witness to the worst of what humankind does to one another and to our common home, the earth, and yet out of a deep and abiding faith and a commitment to evincing Catholic social teaching, they were there to alleviate human suffering, to advance peace and justice, to provide education, healthcare, promote justice. And I was deeply influenced by their example. I knew that often their ministry was in very wrenching social situations and conditions, and yet they had this palpable sense of joy and freedom in the work that they did. And I, as a child, wanted to be like them. It's the clearest form of evangelization, but I suspected I would never be so selfless. And so began to pray that maybe God would use my life to support, in a kind of backroom way, their ministry, to do whatever I could to strengthen their capacity and to equip them to thrive in their ministry. So I hold the church's potential in the highest esteem. Its explicit religious mission has formed the woman that I am. That it is the largest global humanitarian network in the world has rendered me forever committed to its health and vitality. About 40 years ago, Rascal began to observe that we were being asked to contribute in a startup way to some pretty important national Catholic initiatives. And we noticed that the same other funders were joining us in this pursuit. So it occurred to us that we should formally introduce ourselves to other Catholic philanthropists. And that led to the founding of Fatica, Foundations and Donors Interested in Catholic Activities. The whole mission of Fatica is really to educate its foundation members in philanthropy and in the needs of the church. And the idea is to encourage collaborative funding, to be better grant makers, more informed grant makers, more transparent grant makers. And Fatica and Rascal, I will say, both all along, but now that Pope Francis is on the scene, really do follow in the Francis ethos. Catholic social teaching has informed certainly Rascal's work and effort on behalf of the church, as well as Fatica's. But perhaps the most formative experience I had, as Kelly alluded to, was 22 years ago when I was 7 months pregnant with my second child and planning to take some time off of working on behalf of the church. I got a call from a good friend of Kelly's, Father Bob Boulogne, a diocesan priest of the Archdiocese of Hartford, who had been instructed by his bishop to leave parish ministry, which he loved, and to become the Catholic chaplain at Yale University, which he dreaded, but agreed to. And when Father Bob arrived on Yale's campus, he saw that 25% of the student body was Catholic, but there was very little participation. And the Catholic campus ministry was in debt with a beautiful but somewhat deferred in maintenance chapel. And he, although he had no experience in raising money, intuitively he knew that this was going to be an important part of his leadership in order to expand Catholic life on Yale's campus and ensure that these brilliant young adults who were Catholic did not leave Yale with an eighth grade catechetical sophistication of their faith. And he called me and told me that as he had finally had the permission of his predominantly lay board to embark on a professional development effort. And he called me. I was used to people calling me for advice about how to approach a foundation or how to craft a grant proposal or who to look to support their particular ministry. But I had never received a call like this. This call, after telling me that he's finally persuaded his board to embark on a $5 million capital campaign, says to me that my name came to him in prayer. And how do you respond to that when you don't want to raise money for a living? So we laughed about it for many years to come. I was horrified. I did not want to take this on. I admired his leadership and certainly his ministry and his goals, but I had never had any formal experience in fundraising. So he asks me to pray about it for 5 days. I readily agree to that. I know that after 5 days of prayer, my no will be especially eloquent and convincing. And of course, 5 days later, I find myself saying yes. Because as I reflected on it, I realized that he was not asking me to take a job to raise money. He was inviting me to live out my vocation in the world, to model lay clergy collaboration as genuine partners. And when we were successful, we would help to bring to fruition a Catholic intellectual and spiritual center at one of the great world universities. And not just give Yale something more to boast about, but to help raise the bar of Catholic campus ministry. And he and I started out with so many misunderstandings about fundraising, and had to really work through those in the 10 years that we worked together. And I vowed at the end of it that I would help disabuse other people of my own confusion about fundraising, because I truly, truly believe that it is a ministry and that we as members of the Catholic Church would do well to teach it as such. And then finally, Leadership Roundtable. Leadership Roundtable is a network of networks, a network of leaders, ordained religious and lay. Half come from the world of the church, half come from the secular world. They are all Catholic and informed by Catholicism, but bring a very high level of expertise in leadership and management. And particularly, we harness their collective financial acumen, their problem-solving capability, their entrepreneurial spirit, their contemporary managerial best practices. We translate everything, vet it through the lens of canon law, and then offer it to church leaders so that the church can carry out its mission unencumbered by the managerial missteps or obstacles or outdated protocols they have relied on. In fairness and in full disclosure, Leadership Roundtable was formed in the wake of the 2002 sexual abuse revelations coming out of Boston. We never set out to explicitly attend to sexual abuse. That was not our province of experience. But we looked at the underlying conditions that gave rise to this abuse and to this abuse over so many decades. And we identified managerial challenges. So we formed to promote a new culture of leadership and management in the church, predicated on competency, accountability, transparency, co-responsibility, and justice. So those four institutions and experiences have certainly shaped my relationship over time with philanthropy, with fundraising, with finances, and have really changed my outlook on the importance of these things. So normally I give, on this theme, I give talks to priests, pastors, bishops, women religious, provincials, or lay leaders who are running faith-based nonprofits. And they are gathered to learn more about fundraising. And I usually begin by asking them, you are a leader in the church, whether you're a pastor or an executive director of a faith-based nonprofit. How does it make you feel, or what thought do you have when I tell you that you are responsible for the full financial health of your ministry or your parish or your nonprofit? And 90% of the audience will respond along the lines of, it's a necessary evil, dread, loathing. How do I start? I haven't been trained in this. It's a sea of negativity, all of which I shared when I got that fateful call from Father Bob 22 years ago. So I walked them through some of the obstacles, which I'll just briefly list for you. And these are obstacles, each one of which Father Bob and I had to confront head on. We didn't always solve it, but just naming it helped us be more effective and more authentic fundraisers on behalf of Catholic life at Yale. The first observation I had is the way the language we use when we are talking about fundraising. So think about this. Have you ever heard these expressions? Hit her up for money. Put the squeeze on him. Target them. I mean, these are the words of violation and violence. And I never saw myself as a violent person. And yet this language about what I had now agreed to do was constantly part of my world. Fear. So many people are afraid of fundraising. They're afraid on all kinds of levels. They're afraid they're asking for a personal favor rather than bringing the gift of an invitation to invest in something life-giving that benefits others. They're afraid of asking for too much, afraid of asking for too little, simply afraid to make the ask. There is theological ambivalence about wealth. And this is something I'm sure I would benefit from your wisdom at Notre Dame. I don't have the solution or the easy answer to this, but I know that we all bring theological ambivalence about wealth. Is it holy? Is it sinful? Is the question better aimed at the attachment to money or the proper use of money? if we don't name these things and talk about it and put it to prayer, we will bring a cognitive dissonance around the subject of money to our work, whether we're setting budgets or whether we're asking people to invest in our ministries. Another obstacle is inadequate training in finance or fundraising across the board. I have long had a hope that theologates and divinity schools would begin to offer courses in financial literacy and particularly showcasing the role of the development officer as overseeing a ministry in its own right. This is not separate from real ministry. It's not a distraction. It's not a contradiction. And we need to form future leaders in that, whether they see the vocation of raising money and development as their vocation, or whether that is a step to leadership of any faith-based nonprofit, including, and I'm sure Father Jenkins would agree with this, the role of the president of a place like Notre Dame. And then there's the unrealistic expectations and misunderstandings about development on the part of one's prime collaborators. These could be other members of the pastoral team or the staff. It could be board members. There is a kind of sense among some that, oh, if we just get the right person, that person has a magic wand and all of these money problems will be solved. So what I learned way was to see these kind of maxims about successful fundraising through the lens of maxims that would that any one of us would want to incorporate to develop a mature adult life of faith. And therefore, I believe that people of faith are particularly equipped to be successful at fundraising. The first is Kelly actually referenced it in her introduction. It's what I learned from Henry Nouwen, and it's about gratitude. All fundraising begins and ends with gratitude. Second is to be worthy of profound generosity. We are not just we're never just raising money for the sake of raising money. It is always in service to advancing an important ministry, in service to meeting the world's needs. And you want to do everything possible to ensure that you are worthy of generosity. And that includes kind of zeal for excellence, not aiming for perfection so much as a genuine commitment to excellence across the board that has to include the more boring side of ministry, perhaps to some of us, the management of people, facilities, finances. All of that has to be advanced with a degree of excellence and transparency. Money follows mission. That's perhaps the most important aspect of what Father Bob and I learned. When we started the capital campaign at Yale, we did not start at zero. We started at a deficit. And the board, although very smart Yaleys, faculty and alumni, predominantly lay board, their response to fiscal distress was to cut staff, cut programs, shrink the budget, and yet they were ending at a deficit, a growing deficit every year. They had borrowed from a small endowment to pay off the operating costs. It was really a big mess. And they also, after I said yes in prayer to the role, I discovered that they had permanently deleted, like as in a bonfire out back, 80% of their mailing list, permanently deleted. I mean, it's still painful to this day to think about that. So we had no money, and we certainly didn't have the confidence of the board. But we were given a choice. Many people are. You can either you can kind of stop your ministry, go out on the road and raise money bring it back and then open up ministry again, or you can live out of ministry right then and there, which is, of course, the choice we chose and the course of action we took. Now, we had no money to live out of this mission, but what we started with was an audit. We audited the resources at our disposal. And when it came to dollars, the news was pretty bad. But when we expanded our imagination and really thought about the assets at our disposal, we realized that for all of these years, we had overlooked the most important asset at our disposal. We had overlooked it and ignored it. And that is Yale Catholic faculty. So with this insight, we identified 88 members of Yale's faculty across every graduate school and department. And we systematically invited each of the 88 to present to students after the 5 p.m. Sunday liturgy, not about their scholarship, but about their personal life of faith. It was riveting. All of the students knew their professors as intellectual heroes. They had never heard them speak so intimately about something so personal. Each story was unique. And the success of that grew by word of mouth. Students told other students. It's the only time, mind you, that I've ever seen Yale faculty nervous. And I think it's because we are so rarely invited to speak so intimately about the role of faith in our life. Now that one initiative that we started early in the campaign meant that we did not have to fly in these famous professors from overseas and put them up for 3 nights in a hotel. The cost of doing this was really the price of a spaghetti dinner after a 5 p.m. mass. But we were able to tell that story to Yale Catholic alumni all over the country when we were on our fundraising calls, and they loved it. They loved the authenticity, the innovation, and the fruit of that. And they began to invest in us for our next big idea. So money follows mission. The other one I wanted to share as we're coming up on the 30 minutes is that development is a ministry. I know this may seem kind of hackneyed, I guess, but it really formed the core of our approach to fundraising. Father Bob very sadly died just over 2 years ago of glioblastoma, but for 20 plus years, he was my closest friend and prime collaborator. And he was, Kelly will attest to this, the quintessential priest. Absolutely, he loved being a priest. He loved his priesthood. He was so present. His homilies were works of beauty. He worked so hard on his homilies to make it seem effortless at the time. If you were fortunate to have a chance of pastoral ministry with him, I always thought it was like he was holding up a mirror to your soul. And even if you were in distress, what you saw reflected back was what was most beautiful and true about you. So just a phenomenal man. And yet, when I would take him on the road to meet donor prospects, suddenly the guy became taciturn, tongue-tied, fidgety, nervous, almost morose, distracted, and I could not figure out what was going on. It was like a complete personality change. So we talked a lot about this, and we realized that we were both unintentionally looking at donor prospects, especially affluent ones, as objects to try to get as much money as quickly as possible out of, rather than as subjects in their own right, who, like all of us, have hopes and yearnings and anxieties and regrets and desires and aspirations. And we also realize that money is a theme of intimacy, and that to engage in a conversation about money is a pastorally intimate exercise. So pointing all of this out and reflecting on it and talking about it and frankly laughing at how inept we had been up to that point changed everything. As soon as Father Bob realized that, everything changed. And he was then able to bring his full self, his full complement of pastoral gifts and abilities to bear on these donor engagement discussions and conversations. And he was joyful and present and focused, and it really, truly made all the difference. But the best example, the best way to illustrate this point had to do with the man who became our largest donor, Tom Golden. We have named the Caesar Pelli designed exquisite 30,000 square foot Catholic center on Yale's campus after Tom Golden. Tom presented himself to us very, very early in the campaign. We broke every possible rule of thumb, not out of arrogance, but solely out of ignorance. We did no feasibility study. We had not raised a single dollar before blurting out publicly the campaign. So there was no silent phase. I mean, we made every mistake known to humankind in this realm, but we were passionate about our goal anyway, about the direction we were headed. So we announced this big plan to expand Catholic life on Yale's campus at an event that was celebrating the 60th anniversary of campus ministry at Yale. And Tom presented himself with kind of worn and almost tattered clothes, sat way in the back, elderly man, came alone, and he, from the whole audience, expressed an interest in getting involved. And I was exhilarated. And I remember thinking, he could help us with mailings. We have no staff. And so we began a relationship with Tom. This lasted over a number of years. I think he was chagrined that it took Father Bob and me so long to realize that he was, in fact, a person of considerable wealth. He was just so modest and so humble, but I think it spoke well of us that we were attending to anyone and everyone and not kind of playing favorites depending on our assessment of the capacity to give financially. So Tom comes to the decision that we will be successful at raising $25 million from other Yale alumni to build the building. And he says to us, if you do it in my lifetime, I'm giving you a 5-year horizon, I will in turn leave you $25 million or 75% of my estate, whichever is greater. And this was the game changer because it allowed us to go to other alumni and say the long-term financial concerns of the ministry and of the maintenance of the building will be taken care of. So incredibly magnanimous of him. He also, after declaring that, pointed to Father Bob and said, like kind of thumped him on the chest and said, Father, pray I live a long, long life because every year my corpus grows, and this is to your advantage ultimately. So fast forward, it is Easter Sunday, high point of our liturgical calendar, and Tom comes to St. Thomas More at Yale for the celebration of the Eucharist. The chapel is full to overflowing with students and faculty who now see this as their proper spiritual home. The homily is extraordinary. The music is gorgeous. There is joy in the air. My husband and I are seated very near the front with Tom. And I notice in the sea of this just exuberance and joyfulness that Tom is quietly weeping for the entire liturgy. But I also know how deeply, intensely private and shy he is. So I, of course, don't draw attention to this, but I'm really struck by the fact that he wept through the entire Mass. Then, as Mass is concluded and we are filing our way out of the chapel into the abundant sunshine, I turn to Tom and I say, thank you for choosing this day and this sacred space to join us for Easter Mass. You bless us by your presence, Tom. And Tom says to me, I probably should not confess this to you, Kerry, but this is my first Mass in over 40 years. And I just remember in that moment thinking, if Father Bob and I don't raise $15 for this whole shenanigan, at least by the way we have comported ourselves, we have reconciled this man to his God and to his faith community. Tom and Father Bob and I stayed friends for all of Tom's life, and his final gift to us was to ask me to eulogize him at his funeral and Father Bob to preside. So development truly is a ministry. I have many more maxims that I've learned, but I want to stop now and just open it up back to you, Kelly, or to anyone for questions or reactions, insights. I'm just so proud of the work that is being done around money at Notre Dame's campus through the lens of Catholic social teaching. You're onto something of tremendous importance and consequence.
Thank you so much, Kerry, for sharing your wisdom and experiences. We can open up the floor now to any questions. If you have a question, we have, I think, a small enough group here that if you want to just unmute yourself or raise your hand and ask a question, please feel free.
Clemens.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kerry. You mentioned Pope Francis. And in Fratelli Tutti, in the sections 118 to 120, he talks about private property and the limited rights to private property. And I read some scathing reviews of that. And it's not the first time that Pope Francis is heavily criticized. And I'm wondering, what's your sense of the fundraising landscape in the light of Pope Francis's pontificate? Because I hear from some sources it's getting more difficult because of Pope Francis's sometimes perceived anti-wealth agenda. Others say it's getting easier because he is who he is. What's your experience and what's your wisdom? Thank you.
Well, to be honest, Clemens, I worry about the reputation of Catholic philanthropy in general. I have for years, because my experience of it through our family and through the Fatica network, and frankly, through individual donors, whether they were Yale Catholic alumni investing at St. Thomas More or in many other important local, national, and global apostolates that I care deeply about. That experience of their motivations is totally in line with Francis's spirituality and with Catholic social teaching. It's magnanimous. They are demonstrating a conviction I have, which is generosity is humankind's birthright. And we are called, all of us, no one excluded, we are all called to be generous and to be catalysts to inspire generosity in others. I mean, that is the sweet spot of being a person of faith. And all of that is consistent with Francis's writings. But I also know, just as there is a divided world, a divided nation, a divided church, that philanthropy is also divided. Catholic philanthropy is also divided. And there are some who are deeply critical, I think in a condescending manner, frankly, about Francis's understanding of the markets, of free market exchange, of capitalism. All I know is from my experience, the most authentic examples of both fundraising and philanthropy have been radically other-centered. You know, it is, and that's why it's such a privilege. You're almost on sacred ground when you're really attending to connecting a donor's deepest philanthropic passion with the needs of the church or world, and can measure the impact. But I spend a lot of time in Rome for my work, wearing many different hats, but especially Leadership Roundtable. And I'm often struck by this different approach of philanthropy. So let's keep an eye on it. But I wish I could redeem the reputation of Catholic philanthropy in particular. I got my work cut out for me.
Thank you so much.
Kerry, we have one question from Melissa Benefiel. She asks about development as a ministry of high burnout, and she's wondering if you have any kind of advice for overcoming those challenges.
Yes. Okay. Who asked that question?
This is Melissa.
Melissa. Okay.
Benefiel.
Melissa. Great. So it is, I stayed for almost 10 years, which is a very long time in one role as director of development. And I will, it's very wonderful for you to invite me on this Friday to talk about it after the fact. I can, do so with a cup of coffee, very relaxed. But while I was in it, it was extremely demanding. But I think all efforts of consequence are and should be. So I do worry about the burnout. I think some of that burnout would be ameliorated if we did invest in forming development officers, faith-based development officers, and spent more time. I think some of it would be ameliorated if we had a program that offered young adults internships on both sides of the philanthropic coin, a chance to intern with a philanthropic foundation and learn about the business of giving grant money away, and then an internship on the side of raising it. I think there are misunderstandings on both sides of that coin that should be corrected. I also think it's just, if you are the one who is named director of development, everybody's looking to you to raise that money as quickly as humanly possible. And they're sort of leaving you with the burden of responsibility, when in fact, your role should be maestro and getting everybody on board, because everyone has to be invested in the success of that pursuit. So, I write in Imagining Abundance about a dark night of the soul that I had when I was almost at my breaking point. And because I believed so much in what we were bringing to fruition on Yale's campus. I saw it as having a consequence to generations of children not yet born, who wouldn't necessarily come to Yale, but would need to grow in their adult, mature life of faith. And yet I was expected always to be the voice of joy and confidence. And that was hard. It was hard. So burnout is a real thing, but it is so rewarding. And I pushed through this dark night of the soul, basically wagering with God. And I stayed up all night long, and I thought I had two choices. I could quit and nobody would begrudge me. The goal was $5 million. We had already raised 15 million by then, but the goal post kept extending. So I knew if I quit, no problem. People would be like, good job, Kerry. Now we'll look for another development director. Or I could stay and recommit and see this through. And I thought of it as a covenant, that initially I had said yes. This was a covenant, a personal covenant I had with God to do what I thought was impossible. And to quit would have been unfaithful. So in this dark night of the soul, I ended up listing it was like a conversation, and essentially, I had the confidence in prayer that all things would come to pass, that every desire I had about the success of the fundraising, the programmatic advancement, the participation of students, the elevation of Catholic life at Yale would all come true if and then it was a list of things that I had to work through all night. The first was understand that I will never be thanked or appreciated for this. I personally will never. And I was like, but God, that's not fair. I'm the only one who is working on this, you know. Two, I will never be paid for it, especially compared to what my colleagues and friends are doing in other settings. And I was like, again, this is not fair. And it went progressively down the line with more and more things that I was really wedded to. And I released every one of those. I said, okay, I give that up. And as soon as I got through the last one, this radical detachment, I felt the most peace and sense of freedom I have in my entire life. So much so that I laughed and I said, God, now it's in your court. You know, I've given up all of this now. I have confidence and trust in you, and I'm going to go to bed now. And what ended up happening is that all of those same triggers continued to gnaw at me, but I didn't care anymore. I was like, I can observe that, but I don't care because I'm completely confident that this is of the Spirit and will come to fruition. And that helped me steal through my own being on the precipice of burnout. And I'm so profoundly grateful I stayed with it.
Thank you, Kerry. We have two more questions lined up. The first is from Brian Hickey, and then we'll move to Dan Graff. So Brian, if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Kerry, not only for your talk today, but also for your ministry. It's much needed in the church. And I also agree with you that the Center for Social Concerns is awesome. My question is, how do you suggest the clergy and laity take co-responsibility, especially during times of crisis like the one we're in, to not only scrape to keep people in the church, but also to seek those who are looking for the good news, especially in making difficult decisions to invest money for outreach, when we all know the financial impact on the church these days is pretty devastating?
Such a good question. Leadership Roundtable for the last 2 years, really since the Pennsylvania grand jury report and the McCarrick revelations in 2018, we have been working on promoting co-responsibility like crazy. And actually, my last in-person public gathering was on your beautiful campus with John Cavadini and the series on co-responsibility. Loved that. So we're on to something of great importance. It's kind of a simple answer to your question, but Leadership Roundtable is predicated on helping church leaders recognize the resources at their disposal, which is almost always in the form of competent, experienced laity who are proficient in areas that church leaders may not be. Every great leader knows their strengths and weaknesses and knows to bring onto the team people much smarter and better at those things than they are for the sake of the organization, the institution, or the mission. This is personal to me because when I think of the importance of diverse, co-responsible leaders around a table, strengthening the church and making decisions, I think of it first and foremost through the lens of where are the women at the tables of decision-making in our church? Where are the women in positions of leadership, meaningful leadership in our church? How dare we gamble with the future of the church's vitality and impact by ignoring that resource when we can see how the inclusion of women together with men in every institution has benefited that institution, even the US military. So I think of including women, and I'm talking about women, but really we can broaden that to be focused on true diversity. Decision makers, people in leadership should reflect the composition of our faith family. That is the only way we're going to solve for myopia. We are all myopic. No matter how enlightened we think we are all myopic. We only know what we know. And we need the diversity of perspectives of others to analyze the problem more comprehensively, to come up with a better solution, and to carry it out more quickly. Great. And Dan, if you'd like to go next.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ms. Robinson, for your insights and stories this morning. I'm a labor historian at Notre Dame, and I direct at the CST, the Higgins Labor Program. I was really struck by your mentioning that the ways in which money seekers often objectify benefactors in their language, the targets, and these sorts of the violent vocabulary that's used, which is ironic because so many of I don't deal with direct asks for money or any of that, but sort of like as an academic, removed somewhat from while studying capitalism and the market economy, right? There's sort of there is this tendency to insulate oneself, see oneself as removed and purer than others. So it's ironic that people end up deploying the same kinds of attitudes that they're critical of the larger capitalist economy, of seeing people as marks. So I really appreciated that. And I'm wondering if you can just say a little bit, this gets back to Clemens's initial question about, you're really emphasizing the need for building authentic relationships and seeing, the financing as a ministry. And I'm wondering if you can speak a bit about the sort of tension over a program like mine that's really focused on justice. We have this Just Wage initiative that asks really critical questions about the way our world operates and how it distributes money and the surplus. So if you can just speak a little bit about sort of how one navigates sort of understanding benefaction through the lens of justice versus charity. I know that's a big, hard question, but so thanks.
It is, and it makes me want to be your student so I can learn. So my answer will be completely inadequate, but I wrestle with these fundamental questions. Is charity just? Is justice charitable? We need both. I'm convinced we need both, because while my heart and leaning is in the justice camp, solve the systemic problems that give rise to human misery that then require our charity, I would not be doing the right job if I put all of my marbles or eggs in that basket, because then I would be making the decision to ignore this person right before me who is hungry right now. So I think just having the conversation about the intersection and interplay of justice and charity is absolutely crucial. I also think we should probably be a little gentler and more loving and supportive of one another. There are those who discern a vocation in the charitable sector. That is what drives them and fuels them, and we need that. And there are those who are radically committed to justice, and we need them. We really need everybody to live out their vocation according to their proclivities and skills. But I also wrestle with whether philanthropy is holy or just or an ongoing contributor to the problem. Rascal now has these 100 direct descendants of John and Helena serving as volunteers in this philanthropy, and it's having this wonderful impact of evangelization on our family. We tend as a family to gravitate to social justice proposals, but this isn't our money. We didn't make this money. We're stewarding it. And John Rascal was a fierce capitalist. He's fascinating man. I think his conscience was plagued, and that's why he, in fact, created the foundation. I don't know this for a fact, but he believed in free market economy and in capitalism, and he built the Empire State Building, announcing it right before the Depression, and stuck to it. I mean, remarkable prescience and tenacity and kind of conviction. But he also was despairing of the dichotomy of the rich and the poor in his very midst. So he knew that capitalism was helping some people, but not all people. And that, I think, really plagued him. And he looked to the church as part of the solution for that. So again, Dan, I would love to be your student and learn more about it, because these questions really, I think, are at the forefront of conversations among the most serious faith-based philanthropists I know.
Thank you.
We have 3 minutes left and one last question. Mike, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Kerry. I'm fascinated by this. I think it's super important to have a healthy theological exploration and understanding of wealth. I have a question in a different direction. I was captivated by the stories you were telling, especially of Tom Golden, and we know that storytelling is essential to raising money. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to how you've learned to tell good stories. What would be helpful for us to hear as we seek to tell good stories to raise money?
Wow, that's a great question. I think the best and easiest and kind of purest way to raise money is to tell your own story and learn how to tell it well. And by your own story, I mean the story of the ministry or organization that you are working on behalf of. So Father Bob and I learned how to tell very simple stories of people, students who were benefiting from the ministry at Yale, or donors who had invested in us. And it pulls at the heartstrings because it's authentic. So learning how to tell your story well, and that requires really knowing your story and not just knowing the history, the bad and the good, but where you are headed. What does it look like in the future when you have successfully persuaded people to invest in this vision? We have 1 minute, but I love being able to end by bringing the attention to Kelly. Kelly was not born when Father Bob and I met and started the campaign. And we would speak to donors about this is to benefit generations of students not yet born. And Kelly is like the poster child of what our labor was all about. And I couldn't be more proud of Kelly and the work that she's doing. So thank you all so much for a most enjoyable hour on my part.
Thank you, Kerry, so much for your kind words. And it's been such a gift having you here. And thank you all for joining us. I cannot recommend Kerry's book, Imagining Abundance, enough. So if you're interested in more questions about fundraising and want more stories, as Clemens is showing, Imagining Abundance is the book to read. So thank you all again, and enjoy your Friday and your weekend.
All right. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.